My name is Thomas Idukula. I am so excited to introduce Bobin Cheriyagalat, our Boston PCNAK Youth Coordinator for this year. Bobin is an accomplished professional affiliated with a major mutual funds firm in Boston. He is a practicing Christian and a wonderful example of the impact of PCNAK can have on young people. Bobin's transformation has been truly an inspiration for PCNAK youth and many other people in Boston and around. I am sure that Bobin's encounter, his testimony, would be a great encouragement for the young people attending to the PCNAK in Boston this year.
Hi, my name is Sony. I'm based in Boston. Today I'm going to be telling you a little bit about my story and why I'm helping with the 2018 PCNAK conference in Boston. My story really goes back to 2001. It was a time when I was in college, living in the dorm. I remember during that time, a lot of nights I couldn't sleep. I would lie in bed and I couldn't fall asleep. I just had so much anxiety in my spirit, and I'm not even sure even now why I was so anxious, but my spirit just felt so unsettled. And I remember during those times I would get on my knees and beginning to pray and really ask God, when are you going to take this thing away from me? And so it was around that time that I went to a retreat. It was a men's retreat, and at the end of that retreat, a man came to me and he laid his hand on me and then just looked at me into the eyes, and all he said to me was that God has given to you his wisdom. He just said those few words to me and he walked away. And so my story that I want to share today happened at the 2005 PCNAK conference in Rochester. And so the main speaker that year was Ronald Boynke, and the main speaker was Brian Jarrett. And so I went to the conference with my friend Finney and with my dad. And I really went to that conference with a lot of emptiness, with a lot of brokenness. And so the day that God really touched me was that Saturday at the conference. And so that day, most of my cousins came to the English service for the worship, but then went to the Malayalam service because Ronald Boynke was speaking at the Malayalam service. But for whatever reason, I decided to stay in the English service. And the thing that I said to God that day in my spirit, I said, God, if you want to speak to me, you can speak to me through this young man. And I realized just later, looking back on that moment, that was probably one of the most critical decisions that I've ever made in my life. And so that conference, and during that meeting, Brian Jarrett, as he began to speak, he said one of the boldest things that I've ever heard anyone say in my life on a pulpit. He said that he was praying, during that day in his hotel room alone, and as he was praying, Jesus Christ himself came to him and said to him, there are many that are coming to the meeting tonight broken, and I'm going to be coming to heal them. It was such a bold statement to make. But as the meeting was going on, the thing that he was sharing was from Judges. He was sharing about the 700 Benjamites, all who had the skill to hit a camel's hair with a stone. And he had a hypothesis that many of these men were right-handed, but they had been injured in war, and rather than giving up, they began to fight with their left arm. And so that was something that hit home, primarily because I was born in India, born as a lefty, but I was forced to begin to write with my right hand. And so as the meeting was going on, there was a moment where I heard a voice, and it was the first time, that I've ever heard a voice in my spirit from God, but the voice said to me, today I have come to heal you. And I responded to that voice, who am I that the God of all creation would take even a moment to think of me? So after Brian Jarrett was done with his message, there was an altar call, and I usually don't go up for altar calls, but that day I really felt like God was there. And so I went up to the front, and as I went up to the front, I'm standing there, and there weren't a lot of people there, I began to feel God's presence. It was God's Spirit, but He was resting on me, on my head. And I can feel the presence of God there. This presence of God was resting on my head. And I got so nervous, and I thought to myself, you know, I'm here in front of everyone. If I allow God's presence to enter me, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what people are going to think. You know, but after a few moments, you know, the thing that I said to God again in my spirit, I said, God, I trust you. If you have something that you desire to do for me today, if you came to this meeting because you have something that you desire to give to me today, I welcome you in. And so at that moment, I felt the Spirit of God going from being on my head to entering into me. And I felt the Spirit of God moving through me almost like a skilled surgeon. He was moving from one part of me to the other. And he continued to move. Then all of a sudden, I felt the Spirit of God just stop. And after that moment, I felt the Spirit of God just begin to pour Himself out. He poured Himself out a little bit, and then He just continued to pour Himself out. And what I did is I began to hold my hands together because my whole body at this moment was starting to shake. And I got a glimpse of, you know, why Mount Sinai shook when the glory of God came upon it, because at that moment, as God's Spirit was getting poured out into myself, I felt my whole body shaking. So after that moment, you know, I had almost no energy at all. I had to almost crawl back to my seat. And so after that time, you know, when, you know, Finney saw me, and after the meeting and also afterwards, there was 3 things that my friend Finney said to me that I want to share with you guys. You know, the first thing that Finney said to me was, you know, when he had looked at my face after that meeting, he knew that everything had changed forever. All of that anxiety, all of that emptiness was completely gone. And God had filled me with His presence, and now I felt the confidence and security of having God with me. The second thing that Finney said to me that day, he said, you went into that meeting as one man, and you came out a different man. I was a man, Finney knew me for 10 years. He knew that God was distant in my mind, but after that moment, I realized that God was the only thing in life that was worth pursuing. And the third thing that Finney said, he actually said it during a church meeting almost as a testimony. But the third thing that Finney said, he said, I've known Sony for 10 years, and in those 10 years, he hasn't shared one useful thing to me. But it seems that when God touched Sony, that God touched his mind because he's saying all these deep things. And so at that PCNAK conference in 2005, God fulfilled His promise to me that He would give me His wisdom. And for Finney to say that God had touched my mind, you know, Finney is the smartest person that I know. He's got an MD, PhD from Harvard. He's got a master's from MIT. For him to look at me, having known me for 10 years, and to say that God has now touched your mind, it must have been because he saw something significant that God had done. And so even now, after 13 years, after being married, after having 4 kids, including twin boys in the last 2 years, if someone was to even ask me today, what was the most significant moment of your life? I will say without question, without hesitation, the most significant moment of my life was that Saturday in Rochester, New York at the PCNAK conference when I came into direct contact with the God of this universe. And so part of the reason that I'm sharing, you know, my story with everyone today is because I look at our generation, not only within the Indian community, but as I look at the young people today, and I see that most of us are pursuing so many worthless things, you know, things that don't really matter, and yet in our heart we believe that all these things matter. I know in my heart that the reason why people are pursuing so many worthless things is because they've never tasted the glory of God. Because when I tasted the glory of God, I realized that everything else in life was worthless. God was the only thing in life worth pursuing. So my real hope for the 2018 conference, for Boston, for my city, as my people and those within the Indian community come to the city of Boston, is that God would do the same thing in 2018 that God did for me 13 years ago, that He would enter and that He would directly touch lives. Because I know that just looking back at that moment, that in those few moments, in the presence of God, when I came into direct contact with God, it did more for me than all the meetings that I've been to since the day that I was born. And so my prayer is that God would do that again, that the Spirit of God would enter that place, would touch lives, and realize that the only thing worth pursuing is God and God alone.